the North Sea. From its windswept shores to quaint cities with their windmills and quiet canals, the Netherlands depends on water as its lifeline. But hidden below the surface of Dutch waters lie hundreds of sunken ships threatening the nation's livelihood. As the world's sea trade grows in size, Europe's maritime gateway must remain free of juggernauts. In the summer of 2013, the Dutch government began an extraordinary campaign to clean out the nation's channels of old shipwrecks, silent dangers rusting under the surface for decades. The waterways of the Netherlands are the vital lifeline for the whole of Europe. Whether through the Rhine estuary or the ports of Rotterdam, goods and raw materials make their way through Dutch national waters to Germany, the continent's powerhouse. But wrecks litter the sea floor and create dangerous bottlenecks in supply lines, posing a serious hazard to the nation's economy. The wrecks either needed to be removed or reduced in height to ensure free passage of the giant cargo ships that Europe's economy depends on. Every year, the Dutch government's Ministry of Public Works, the Rijkswaterstaat, orders a clean-out of the nation's port approaches. The 4 wrecks to be salvaged in this job were an unknown wreck lying on the bottom of the Ijol Channel, the Ariana cargo ship which blocked the Westerschelde waterway, the Jan Breidel fishing boat lying in the entry channel to Rotterdam's Europort, and an 1860s steamship lying off the island of Vlieland. In 2013, 2 companies were commissioned to do the job: salvage giant Smith Salvage and the family-run company of Van den Herik.
Most of the economic power in Europe is coming from our neighbors on the east. So Holland is situated very well for the connection of the big river Rhine, you can say, or Waal in Holland. We are naturally found a good position because the river is there, and the big steel companies were in the 1880s in Germany. So we are connected together by nature.
Well, they wanted to make the approaches to the harbors more safe, and there were some obstacles in the way. And so this is all about safety and getting a more efficient sailing to and from the ports.
Here in the headquarters of Van den Herik in Sliedrecht, east of Rotterdam, Salvage Masters and engineers plan the operation down to each minute detail using the latest 3D modeling and mapping technology.
We had the wrecks in the Westerschelde, the entrance to Antwerp, and we had a wreck on the north above the island of Vlieland.
Meanwhile, in their nearby shipyard, welders prepare the buckets and grippers used on the barges in the open sea. Van den Herik is a medium-sized company, but it stays at the forefront of salvage technology by engineering and constructing most of its own equipment. This way, they can tailor each barge, gripper, or tool for the particular ship salvage or dredging job that lies ahead. With hundreds of shipwrecks littering the sea floor, there is no lack of work. The Van den Herik fleet of barges and work units is constantly making Holland's waterways safer.
Yeah, we have engineering department inside, and we have the guys with the good brains outside. Never forget that. On the when theory and practice on this point where it cuts, there is the truth, of the best equipment, and we think we have to do it ourselves to be one step better as the other companies. There's always competition, and like in football, only the best is in the team.
The Westerschelde is the segment of the Rhine estuary that runs between the Netherlands and Belgium to Antwerp. 200 million tons of cargo pass through here every year. Until 2013, its navigation was hampered by the wreck of the Ariana, a cargo ship that sank in 1952. René Tromp is Van den Herk's supervisor on the big wreck removal operations.
The Ariana is a ship which sunk in 1952 because the pilot made a shortcut and made a big mistake by taking the shortcut too late with falling water. So it got stuck, and after 2-3 hours of pulling with of trying to get off the sandbank, it broke.
The salvage work was authorized by the Dutch Ministry for Infrastructure and Environment. At the end of August 2013, Minister Melanie Schultz van Hagen visited the salvage operation to get a hands-on feel for how the channel clearing was proceeding.
Helemaal weghalen is vaak heel moeilijk, omdat ze zeker na zoveel jaar echt al helemaal in het zand liggen. Dat geldt ook voor dit schip. Dus er zit gewoon voor een deel ondergronds. Nou, dan maakt het ook niet zoveel uit. Maar het deel wat erboven zit en wat geraakt kan worden, dat halen we eigenlijk weg.
Het blijft dus een soort blind date onder water, waarin je op basis van de scans die je hebt van de bodem en van het schip probeert om het op een gecontroleerde manier boven te brengen. En op dit moment lukt dat aardig.
Ja, het is natuurlijk leuk om te doen. Je moet eerst een paar keer grijpen voordat je echt een stuk schip te pakken hebt. Maar dan trilt zo'n apparaat heel erg. En vervolgens kun je dat ijzer weer mee omhoog krijgen en op het schip leggen. En dan is weer een stukje werk gedaan.
So yeah, old ship loaded with iron material is that one big clump of iron, and that's why we invented teeth. I had the idea together with our chief the technical department to rip all especially the iron parts apart and then pick them up with the excavator.
When the Ariana sunk here in the Westerschelde in 1952, it was carrying iron bars. Salvage Masters had to cut off any part of the ship that protruded above 15 meters depth, but the ship's cargo hampered the work. Accurate survey of the wreck site is vital for success.
The hardest part was from that ship we knew which ship it was, but what was the front and what was the back was not very clear. So we really have to, we discussed after each session. We only could work there with low water, with the two excavator engineers with me from what is it, and oh, that's the back and that's a part of the ship. But the part between the cargo hull and the engine room, there was one very tough part we hardly could get.
If removing the Ariana wreck proved a technological challenge, René's next task would prove hazardous too, due to the location of the wreck. The sea off the island of Vlieland is one of the most dangerous in the Netherlands. Meanwhile, the Smit teams had just come off their part of the cleanup campaign with a spectacular raising of the Jan Breidel fishing boat. Smit Salvage was commissioned by the Rijkswaterstaat to remove 2 wrecks from the North Sea. Kees van Essen is Smit Salvage's head of operations and is responsible for selecting new Salvage Masters.
We select our Salvage Masters from the merchant marine, so people who have been at sea like myself for 10, 15 years, being a chief officer or even a captain, and then when we have a vacancy, we have some people who are interested in the job. We test them thoroughly, and then they are sent out on a job.
The biggest challenges for Salvage Masters is not always salvaging the ship, but rather coordinating the many interested parties who must work together on projects like these, which are national in scale. With its great maritime tradition, it is no surprise that the Netherlands boasts the largest salvage companies in the world. They draw their young resources from the merchant marines, which in turn is supplied with well-trained personnel by specialized facilities such as this one in Rotterdam, the STC school where students learn the basics of nautical engineering.
I think you have to, you need a person, and it can be, we have also one female Salvage Master, so it's not especially a man, but you need a person who can deal with authorities, can deal with, manage a team, but also knows what he's talking about, so he knows what the ship is. And he has to very well cooperate with the superintendent of the team and the team itself, because that are the guys who have a long training and experience in the salvage operations.
I think there is almost always there is danger in our job, because we work in difficult, strange and dangerous environments. So the vessel could be on fire, or the vessel could be aground, leaking, possible to break or to sink. So there is always the possibility that complications would turn up, and that the whole situation would become from dangerous to really, really dangerous, and even that you have to evacuate your own personnel from the vessel.
Smith Salvage has been contracted to remove 2 deep wrecks: the unknown wreck lying upside down in the Ijol Canal, and the Jan Breidel in the approaches to Rotterdam. Their campaign started in early summer 2013, and they would employ their largest barges and sheer legs to do the job. Captain Bart Huitzing is the salvage master who ran the Jan Breidel operation.
Jan Breidel was standing straight up on the seabed, fully intact, as we could see from the survey data. So we decided to use one of our tug lifts, this time the tug lift 7, to lift a complete wreck in one time from the seabed. We decided to lift her in one piece, because it would be more efficient, more quick, and also less danger for our divers.
July 2013. Captain Bart Huitzing inspects the material to be transferred to the sheer leg, and soon the team is ready to leave.
We used one of our Smith barges and 2 tugboats to accompany us and to assist us. And this was the main spread which we used during the wreck removal operations.
All the equipment what we need, depending on the salvage, come from the warehouse here in Rotterdam. We have a lot of pumps, a lot of dive equipment, air diving, saturation diving. Everything is here in Rotterdam. Dus there is nothing on a shear leak. If you like to have a shear leak, then all the equipment is coming from Rotterdam, the warehouse.
Jan Breidel is a fishing vessel, a kotter we call it. It's about 35 meters long. It used to fish within the channel off the coast of Belgium. And it got hit in 1988, if I'm not mistaken, by a freight carrier, a normal vessel, and it sank almost instantly.
Salvage masters must first gather necessary data and coordinates for locating the shipwreck and determining its condition.
Well, basically we need a good survey. Quite often we also do our own dive surveys, just to see with our own eyes what the situation is below the seawater.
The call goes out to the divers and technicians, who must be ready at a moment's notice to take off on their next international salvage mission.
When they give me a call exactly in the night, then I say goodbye to family. I take my suitcase and I take a taxi, and they bring me to Rotterdam Airport or to Schiphol.
10 years beforehand, Smith had used its shear legs and its cutting-edge technology to remove the Tricolor, which sank nearby with its cargo of 3,000 automobiles in December 2002, while traveling from Belgium to the UK after a collision with another container ship. No lives were lost, but the ship remained stuck in the mud in a waterway that was just 30 meters deep. The salvage operation in 2003-2004 used a unique cutting wire to carve the wreck into 9 sections, each one a whopping 3,000 tons. The massive shear legs that Smith used can raise weight of up to 4,000 tons. In the summer of 2013, Bart decided since they could do it, they would raise the wreck of the Jan Breidel wholly intact. They needed divers to check the situation of the wreck, however, and to clean out any debris in the way of the slings.
Every salvage job we start with is starting with a dive inspection, so we know the situation near and on the wreck.
Divers doing the inspection must stay underwater hours at a time in order to pinpoint weak and strong areas of the vessel that can best hold slings and cables. They usually wear this helmet to communicate with a computer above the surface through dedicated cables.
This is a super light. He's very light. It's about 17 kilo. It's not so super light. And this one is the umbilical. The umbilical go to the dive panel and to the helmet. Inside of one of this umbilical is air, light, video, depth meter. Sometimes it will be digger, and then it's also hot water for saturation for the suits.
Because the Jan Breidel was intact and standing straight up on the bottom of the sea floor, divers were able to quickly make their determinations.
We found that we had good points where we could attach the slings to. So we were quite confident after the first 2 dives that we could manage and we could do this job. Actually quite rapidly also, because everything was free and we did not have to do any additional work, such as airlifting or removal of quite a lot of sediment. This was we could do everything in one time.
The fishing boat, similar to so many that ply their trade through the North Sea, lay upright, so divers were able to slip the first sling under the rudder and propeller fairly easily. The bow was more of a problem, however.
Well, the sling on the aft ship was fairly easy because the so-called window near to the rudder and the propeller was free, so we could easily bring the aft sling underneath. The forward sling was a little bit more difficult. We had to lift her with one sling, and to make some more room between the keel of the vessel and the seabed, so which would enable us to put a forward sling also in the correct position. So it would be one stable hoist.
There was a little bit space underneath the Jan Breidel. Then we put a big steel wire. We put it underneath. It was more than enough. I thought about 2 meters. Then we heave it up. We have a lot of space more. Then we bring another a double steel wire underneath. Then we touch it down. And on the shaft we have also space. And then we bring the other steel wire.
Under the hydraulic pull of the massive shear leg, the Jan Breidel began to gradually emerge from the abyss of the North Sea. Salvage Masters monitored her slow rise to the surface. The intact boat was a spectacle to see, covered with mollusks and sea creatures of every kind, and rusted by her years underwater.
Right, good. That's a nice one, huh? For the kids, huh?
Yeah, the kids. For your boy.
Yeah, that's nice.
Once brought up from the dark depths, the sunken fishing boat took on the spooky aura of a ghost ship.
Right, good. That's a nice one, huh? For the kids, huh?
Yeah, the kids. For your boy.
Yeah, that's nice. Good.
By the end of August 2013, the Van den Herk team has successfully reduced the Ariane wreck to a safe height and now turns its attention to another wreck that sank in the 1800s off the windy island of Vlieland in the north of Holland. The remote area of Northern Ireland is an important shipping route because Northern Holland's renewable energy industry is rapidly expanding, requiring larger vessels to have access to its power plants.
From the North Sea to Eemshaven in the north we have the port of Groningen, and Groningen has developed an area of big importance called Eemshaven with power plants and windmill energy, so big expanding in Groningen, Eemshaven. And for the power plants there is a need of bigger ships.
In 2012, Van den Herik was involved in a massive cleanup of the northern approaches to the Dutch city of Groningen, strategic to the nation due to its massive wind farms. Here, Van den Herik partnered with another company to raise a number of wrecks that littered the sea floor, but had to carefully avoid damaging vital underwater power cables. It was a delicate task. Now Van den Herik was contracted to clean up a wreck close to the windswept shores of Vlieland in the north of Holland. In this operations room, Van den Herik engineers and salvage technicians study all there is to know about the tides, shifting sands, and Dutch waterways they are called upon to keep clean. Like in all salvage operations, a number of things can go wrong.
You have to cope with the elements, and you have to have luck or bad, and a very good plan and good equipment and very, very good people who stands for the job. I think that's all elements make you successful or not.
As the Van den Herik teams left for the port of Harlingen, the October storms were on their way. They had a short window of good weather in which to complete the work, so they hoped to find the wreck quickly. Dawn rises on the flatlands of Holland. Children make their way to school in the characteristic port town of Harlingen. On the quayside, the crew of two barges, the Prince 4 and the Prince 5, prepare for their extraordinary mission out into the North Sea. The team must work fast into good weather because the sea around Vlieland is known to be treacherous for ships in bad weather. The hundreds of shipwrecks lying at the bottom of the sea attest to the dangers of the area. René Tromp is the supervisor of this operation too. He must oversee every detail of the complex effort to clear the Dutch channels so they are deeper and can accommodate bigger vessels.
I think a lot of commercial merchandising is still going over the sea, especially in Holland with a few big harbors. So it's very important for Holland and the Dutch government to keep clear of all the main sea routes. Deeper, so they can have bigger ships, but also the main routes to the harbors has to grow with them.
On the barge, salvage workers under his command check every cable and piece of equipment to make sure the gear is operational before setting sail. With him is surveyor Bram van der Kooi. They employ a mix of new technology and traditional methods to get the job done. Very little is known about the wreck they must salvage, as it sunk in 1866.
The actual name of the wreck, it's the Mailbank. It's been reported missing in 1866, and its cargo was bags of meal and wool. And a few days after it was reported missing, the beaches of Vlieland were full of sacks with mail, and the people of Vlieland sold it and made sweaters of it. So that's why the archaeologists think it's that ship.
The crew sets sail with the barges in tow. The weather is fair and hopes are high they will soon be able to find the ship on the first day out. The waters off Vlieland are lined with wrecks of all kinds. Finding the right one will be a challenge. The Prince 5 is a jack-up barge with 3 20-meter-long legs. These legs are lowered down to rest firmly on the sea floor. Once there, they turn the floating barge into a stable platform from which to work with the diggers and grabbers. These pontoons can be transported with tugs to salvages or ship disasters all over the world.
A pontoon, it's the Prince 5. It's a pontoon from 40 by 10 meters, and there's a big excavator on it, 120 ton. It can reach until 14-15 meters under the waterline, and we got a big cutting teeth on it, so we can rip the wreck apart. Afterwards we put on a normal digging bucket to grab the pieces which have been ripped apart.
The transport barge is also the crew's accommodation, kitchen, and of the 2 vessels, the only one that actually has an engine.
The other material that we're having here is the Prince 4. It's an old ship from the Dutch army. They used to bring tanks from Harlingen to Vlieland, so we bought it and we put a crane on it. And in this job it's for moving around, because the Prince 5 has no own propellers.
Herman and Dirk are the crane operators, and they manage the hydraulic systems aboard the jack-up barge. The accommodation barge is an old military transport and is perfectly suited to carrying the debris from the wreck and the heavy equipment. GPS satellite systems locate the barge precisely, and the monitor indicates the estimated position of the wreck with the vertical and horizontal elevations. It is the task of René and Bram to provide accurate information to the crane operators. The barge is then positioned carefully over exactly where the computers determined it to be, and the crane is prepared for its fishing operation.
Before we start the job, there's been a survey done by a third company, so it's we have no influence on it. So we get that survey and we take a look from what surface do we have to reach and make free. We put that in the crane and there we start working on that.
The coordination between man and machine is delicate. The computer tells the crane operator exactly where to position the bucket and grabber. It is time to start the underwater expedition.
From the archaeologist, we've got a rather precise survey and also a description what's the front of the ship and what's the back of the ship. From the historical museum they've got here. All those information has been put together by an archaeologist, and they give me a form, so that's why I got my information.
This map shows the Vlieland sea floor covered with dozens of wrecks from centuries gone by. It is one of the world's busiest sea lanes, running from the channel ports of France and England up past the largest port in the world to the far north. Tankers and transport vessels share the sea with fishing boats from the Dutch ports. This is an area Van den Herik knows well. There is no way of bringing the whole ship up, so René and his men have no choice but to break it up. The main thing they are looking for is the engine, the boiler, something that can identify the wreck for posterity and for the records of the Dutch government. The surveyor sets the depths for the digger arm so as to be sure to reach the sunken ship, but still the wreck remains elusive as the current slowly pushes the barge off-site. Every couple of hours, the captain orders a repositioning. Several times a day, René and Bram go out in the survey boat to carry out a multi-beam reconnaissance of the wreck. To calibrate the sonar data properly, Bram uses this sensor to measure the speed of sound underwater.
I drop it to the bottom, and then it registrates on every meter what is the speed, the sound speed of the water. So on every meter I'll get a speed.
This way, the sonar that René lowers from the bow of the survey boat can accurately map out horizontal and vertical elevations of the wreck. He compiles a day-by-day report as to progress, and Bram passes this data on to the monitors in the crane cabin.
We have a system on it with GPS, and there are all kinds of sensors who are measuring how the boom and the stick and the bucket go. And in combination with the GPS system, we exactly know how deep he is with the bucket.
This allows the crane operators Dirk and Herman to fix any machinery. Crane operators continue their search, adjusting the equipment to the new data being given by the sensors underwater. They don't find the shipwreck on the first try, or the second, or the third. It is an imprecise science that takes patience and skill. Then suddenly, the barge shudders. The monitor shows that they have reached the right depth, and now the correct coordinates too. The hook has pierced the wreck's rusting hull. It comes thundering down onto the transport barge. The bolts and welding betray the age of the ship. It looks like an 1860 steamer, but only finding the boiler will be decisive in identifying it once and for all. Crabs scuttle away. Herman, the crane operator, finds an interesting artifact, one of the ship's portholes. It has been twisted under the pressure of the waves. None of the crew survived the shipwreck, and now René and his team saw firsthand what was left of that tragedy. As the coupled barges realign with the wreck, René and Bram go back out to survey the sea floor and estimate the height to which they must cut the wreck. Their biggest problem now is positively identifying it so that the Reichswaterstaat can be sure that the obstacle they had identified has indeed been removed.
When we really find the engine, there's an engine number in it, and so they can prove it's the ship.
Aboard, Dirk is still using the survey data installed in his cabin computer to aim at the wreck, attempting to remove whole pieces. The search is on for the boiler.
Tonight, with low water, we're gonna try to get 2 spots with a bucket, and we can do that in one low water tide. After we done that tonight, they're gonna build up with the grabber to try to get hold of the motor.
Now that Salvage Masters have located the wreck with certainty, they must change the hook and put on the bigger bucket to bring up the larger pieces of the wreck. It takes a whole team to swap the massive pieces of equipment. Finally, the large bucket with teeth is lowered into the water. It hits its goal immediately. More pieces of the millbank are brought to the surface. But as the sun sets and the day's work nears its end, there is another complication. Mother Nature. A storm is brewing, and the crew must begin to batten down the hatches. These coasts are among the most dangerous, especially during inclement weather. It is the north wind that has caused so many ships to sink off this coast. René has no choice but to call in the tugboats. They have to go to safer waters. A storm is brewing over Vlieland, but the Van den Herik crew does not stop working. They prepare the equipment for the next day's operations. Dawn rises over Vlieland and the storm has subsided. The barges take up their positions of the previous day and the search for the boiler of the millbank begins. As pieces of the wreck mount up, the crew search for clues to its identity. From the remains, they believe that the ship is the millbank, which was recorded by the Lloyd's Register as being lost on this coastline in 1866. In order to prove it, however, the crew still has to find the boiler, breaking up the superstructure as much as possible to expose the engine room. The storm has left choppy seas, and the tides affect the depth they can work at. The tide is low, and the wind has calmed. In the early hours of the morning, Dirk strikes something hard with the bucket. He has come to know the wreck like the back of his hand, and he thinks he knows what the hard and heavy object is. Before the hunt for the boiler can be concluded, however, the crew realize that the two barges have moved apart during the windy night. For perfect accuracy in removing the boiler, they have to be tied back together again, an operation that is easier said than done. Once again, the grabber is put on. Once the gripper is on, it can be located to the exact spot of the heavy object, which they believe is the boiler. The brittle iron that comes up confirms their hopes, but the piece is too heavy to lift intact. The operation takes several days, and the sea has become rough, making accurate surveys harder. However, only at the end of it can René feel satisfied.
We also removed the boiler. It was a little bit too high, but because it was too big to tear apart at that depth, approximately 30 tons, 35 tons, we couldn't lift it on board. Dragged it to shallow water, and then we left it for a few days, and today we flushed it a little bit so that it was cleaner. All the mud was out, and then we torn it apart, and yet it's on deck.
Piece by piece, the engine of the millbank is broken up and brought on deck. It piles up sadly on the barge, ready for official inspection. As soon as it leaves the sea floor, it begins to rust and decay. Every sort of ship goes by as the remains of the millbank are brought to the surface. The company compliance officer takes pictures to show the Reichswasserstaat. He collects the survey data gathered by René.
This week we achieved almost everything we wanted. There are only 2 or 3 small points this morning who are still above the level that we have to reach. So we moved those this morning, and then I hope with the survey from this afternoon that everything is free of objects.
At the end of the summer cleanup campaign, the Van den Herik team write their final report for the Dutch government. The Westerschelde and seas off Vlieland are safe for large ships. Close by, at the Smith salvage yards, The salvage team that pulled up the Jan Breidel in 2013 can also be proud of their work. As the largest salvage company in the world, Smit can count on the most powerful shear legs. The Smit equipment is built to raise the biggest and the smallest of wrecks.
In the end, we had roughly around 600–650 tons on the. It's a little bit difficult to say because the water is still dripping out and some sediment is still dripping out. Tucklift 7 can lift 1,200 tons, so it would be well within the capacity of the tucklift to lift the Jan Breidel.
As the Jan Breidel was transferred to be broken up on the Smit transport barge, the team moved north to reduce the unknown wreck in the Ijel Canal using Smit's giant grabbers. This too had been a question of simply reducing the height of a sunken ship.
Wreck is positioned within the new approach to IJmuiden port. They also want to be able to bring in more deeper draught vessels, but nobody knows what this wreck is, when it sank, and they believe it would be between 1910 and 1920.
We had a big crab in our share leak, in the Tucklift 6, and it's, I'm sure you see some grabs, but this one is huge. It's about wide 7 meters. When it is open, it's 7 meters wide. Okay, we lower it down. We lower it down like this, touch the bottom, then we go with 50 tons, we close it, we make more force in it, then it keeps about 100 tons like that. The weight of the crab is about 90 ton, 90 ton. Then we grab him and then we go slowly up. When it is on the surface, big barges are coming. The barge, we bring it very close to the share leak, and then slowly down, lower, open, and then it's fall down, and then we do the same thing again.
With 2 wreck removals each, Smit Salvage and Van den Herrik have both helped to make Dutch waters safer for the biggest transport ships in the world. The Milbank and the Ariana have been successfully removed. The Jan Breidel has been brought up in one majestic piece, and the mystery steamship has been cleared from its dangerous resting place. Each year, salvage operations like these are helping to make the Dutch channels deeper and safer, able to accommodate even bigger ships that are the lifeblood of Europe's new economy. But while 4 wrecks have been removed, there are still many more on the seabed. And as the sun sets on the North Sea, a lonely lighthouse signals the dangers of the shallow waters, a reminder of the graveyard of ships.
On the 28th of December 2014, one of the worst tragedies of modern maritime history unfolded in the Adriatic Sea between Italy and Greece. Dozens of rescue ships rushed to the site of a burning ferry carrying more than 400 passengers, the Norman Atlantic. In the chaotic evacuation from the smoke and flames, 10 people died, while another 18 people are still missing and presumed dead. The charred and mangled remains of the Norman Atlantic sit at the dock in Bari, waiting to be fully searched for remains of the victims who died in the fire that destroyed the ship on the 28th of December 2014. 18 people are still missing, and there may be bodies of yet more still inside. Refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, or Iraq. Stowaways on the most tragic journey. The ship left from Patras, Greece, on the 27th of December 2014, loaded with trucks and people travelling in the festive season, but who would never reach their final destination of Ancona, Italy.
Unfortunately, the crews are not well enough trained, and the safety systems aren't designed sufficiently to intervene when needed.
I saw people there without jackets, without anything, who woke up and went out dressed as they were, in their pajamas.
We encouraged each other, and then we came back to Brindisi enthusiastic about what we had been able to do, proud of what we did. The Norman Atlantic ferry fire is just the latest of a mounting number of maritime disasters that cast doubt on the safety of passenger-carrying ships. Another ferry disaster in 1990 changed the life of this man, who has championed the cause of safety at sea for the past 20 years. He lost his wife and unborn child. Jan Hassem is the president of the Skagerrak Association, created after the Scandinavian Star fire in 1990. We were expecting the baby in the summer of 1990, but we were on board the ship Scandinavian Star that caught fire in the middle of the night between Oslo and Fredriksand in Denmark. Christine lost her life and our unborn child, together with 158 others. After this, I worked a lot in the support group for Scandinavian Star, and we became very engaged in safety questions. The Norman Atlantic was a recent ferry, built in 2009 in Italy and owned by the Wismar shipping line. It had been rented to the Greek company Anek Lines to run the route between Patras and Ancona. It was a large ship, 186 meters long and 26 wide, with a draft of over 6.7 meters, able to host up to 2 kilometers of vehicles in its hold, from heavy trucks to cars and motorbikes. Refrigerated trucks are forced to turn off their engines in the ferry, so in order to keep their perishable goods cool, they link up to the ferry's own electrics. The vehicle fumes can trigger the fire alarms. There are no exceptions to the engines off rule. When the Norman Atlantic left Patras, it had 90 cars, 128 trucks, 2 buses and 1 motorbike aboard, together with 475 passengers and crew registered on the ship's manifest, although its total capacity was over 800. Truck drivers Marino Grzincic and Zoran Koron were on the ship. Marino Grzincic got to the ferry late, and his truck was searched by police with heat sensors looking for stowaway migrants.
It goes in and goes over the whole refrigerator, over the pallets to check that there is no one inside. They check underneath too. I have never seen, well, I have seen people over there in the port of Patras that were waiting, but I haven't seen anyone on a truck.
Yes, I saw illegals down in Greece. There were quite a few, and I saw them going to England, and they are everywhere. There are always checks to make sure they haven't got in, especially in with the goods, in the cupboards, under the axles. I mean, the illegals have been trying to get in everywhere for several years now. You just have to be careful.
Despite checks in Patras, the evacuation revealed inconsistencies between the ship's manifest and the actual numbers of people on board. 499, including 55 crew and excluding a number of clandestine passengers. There were 3 Syrian asylum seekers and 1 Iraqi aboard too, and at least 1 Afghan, all of whom survived. But indications are that there were many more who did not. Although the ship sailed first to Corfu and then out to the open sea, the high winds and gathering snowstorms were not ideal for the crossing.
I got into the ship at the port of Patras on Saturday around, well, I was the second from the last onto the ship, and I managed to get onto the ship at the last minute. I was at the port at 5:25, and the ship sailed at 6.
I was carrying peppers, loaded at Timbaki in Crete, and I was due to take them to Croatia, to Jankombasco, to the Lidl. The electrical system didn't work well on that ship, I was told. This was my first time, but the Greeks told me that the electrical system didn't work, and that if you had meat or delicate goods, they'd wait a day for another ship. If a fridge short-circuits, well, we know what happens if a fridge short-circuits.
Si sente nettamente.
In the black box recording, you can hear the duty mariner clearly say, "No, don't worry. It's a truck with its engine running." So if the truck had its engine on, it means that it was not connected to the ship's electrical system. Finding out that a truck had its engine on in no way alarms the people on the bridge.
Non fa nessuna impressione al ponte di comando.
The causes of the fire that began in the vehicle hold of the ferry are still unknown. But when at 4:30 a.m. the captain and crew realized there was smoke rising through the decks, they activated the automatic fire extinguishers, which, to their horror, did not work. Crew members began waking up the passengers and ordering them to go up the stairs, as the lower decks became hotter and hotter and the air unbreathable. At 4:47 a.m. the captain called for help.
La nave Norman Atlantica, abbiamo un grave incendio a bordo, Velocemente con i rimorchiatori, con tutte le unità che potete. Abbiamo a bordo 411 passeggeri.
But that was just the beginning of a terrifying odyssey for the passengers. Many things went wrong, and a number of safety protocols that could have saved lives were inexplicably not followed. On the night between the 27th and 28th of December 2014, the Greek-run, Italian-owned ferry Norman Atlantic caught fire. The weather was nightmarish, and the high winds fanned the flames, spreading the fire along the entire length of the 184-meter-long ship and swiftly from one deck to the next.
I went onto the deck around 4:50 because I looked at the time when I went out onto the deck. Before that, we spent 10 or 15 minutes in the reception where everyone was. Then we all went out. At first, when you see that smoke, you say, well, I don't know. It's something small. A flame out in the kitchen. Someone forgot to move a pan. I mean, you don't think that it's something that big.
The captain had called Mayday, and ships and helicopters of 3 national coast guards, navies, and a number of cargo vessels all converged on the stricken ferry.
We went out on deck 5, and since the fire was quite strong, you could see that the deck had already changed color and was burning. Then we went up to deck 6 and deck 7. I thought to myself, well, I turned right, thinking to myself, if the fire is below and the smoke is coming up, it's better to go upwards. So I looked for ways of going upwards. After a while, I saw that they were lowering the lifeboats into the sea, and that gets the adrenaline going.
The Greek Coast Guard was the first to fly into the area, and although it was still dark, what they saw was shocking. the whole length of the ship was ablaze. What they didn't know yet was the chaos unfolding aboard. The starboard lifeboat had been burned and was unusable. But more incredibly yet, without orders from the captain, a number of crew members had lowered the port lifeboats too, with just 49 people aboard, although there was room for 150.
I soccorsi sono stati assolutamente caotici.
The rescue was absolutely chaotic. One of the lifeboats was lowered, and although it had 150 places, it had only 50 people aboard, and a good part of which were mariners, crew members. Then I saw that they were lowering the inflatable life rafts into the sea. The life rafts, no. But to get into the life raft, you have to get into the tube to slide down. And I thought to myself, why don't they have more? Why don't we all get into one? And someone explained to me that if you want to get in, you have to have a raft underneath, and that there weren't any more, and that on top of that, there was someone stuck in the tube, and that after a few hours, we saw that two were stuck.
3 life rafts were deployed, but one of them was detached from the chute passengers had to slide down to get into them. One passenger fell to his death in the freezing sea. Another was pulled up again. One of the inflatable life rafts capsized, and another attempted to get back to the burning ship, and a passenger died when he fell from a rope ladder lowered to help them back up.
Vento forte.
The wind was strong, and then, I don't know, people were getting into the life rafts, and I knew I wasn't going to go. I was too far away. I saw one only, the plastic one. I think it holds 150 people, and I worked out that there were more of us.
Facendo 2 calcoli, sapevo che siamo in più, no?
Fewer than 100 passengers had managed to get on the life rafts and lifeboat and were rescued by the ships that had hastily sailed to the rescue. Now the 300 men, women and children stranded on the burning ferry had no choice but to wait for the helicopters. Conditions were hellish. Below decks, passengers could hear the explosions of fuel tanks. Several containers of olive oil also went up in flames. The heat from beneath was excruciating, but on the top deck it was freezing cold. The sea below was treacherous. The anxious passengers had no easy options.
Loro erano nelle condizioni di stare.
They were forced to stay in the open air with the heat of the flames under their feet. So much so that some of them have the soles of their feet burned. If not worse, the soles of many shoes simply melted due to the terrible heat that they were subject to.
Calore tremendo che veniva.
Captain Mario Valente was the harbour master of Brindisi at the time. He coordinated the crisis group as the tugboats of the Barretta family and Brindisi mobilized and headed to the scene, with 3 tugboats, the Tenax, Marietta Barretta and Asmara.
The
port of Brindisi was immediately asked to send to the location of the incident the tugboats of the Fratelli Barretta. So our operations room alerted the crews of the tugboats. The tugboats were reinforced because they were going outside of the port area, so had to have a double crew. And above and beyond the crew, they took on board a fire brigade unit too.
We received a call from the Coast Guard of Brindisi, telling us that there was a ship in flames close to the coast of Albania. So we got our first unit ready, and we went out at the first light with our first tugboat.
The Barretta tugs were ordered out of port to the distant location, far from Italian territorial waters, with double crews and 4 firemen aboard each tug. In co-command of one of the tugs was Luigi Manesi. Today, he is preparing the Tenax tug for a quiet mission in the port. The tiny spaces and steep steps belie the amazing power of the tugboats. The tall commander's cabin gives a panoramic view of everything that is happening. Manesi prepares to give his deputy the order to start the engines. Down in the engine room, his colleague awaits the orders from the bridge.
Director.
Yes, Commander.
As soon as you can, give me the control from the bridge.
Yes, sir, I'll get it going, then call you back.
Okay.
Domenico tends to the man's 6,000 horsepower electro-diesel engines and gets through the process of turning them on. Commander, the engines are running. Commander, over to you.
Okay. I'll call you when we are underway to have you come up, okay?
They go through the process every time they leave on a mission. The engine needs no further tending once running, so Domenico joins the commander on the bridge.
La mattina verso le 7 mi ha chiamato Luca, un collega.
My colleague Luca called me around 7 in the morning, and he said, Luigi, you have to rush on board because there's an emergency just off Otranto, he told me at first. I thought he was joking, but he insisted, so I got up straight away and I ran. At 8 a.m. I was aboard, and we left immediately for the coordinates that they had given us.
Subito verso le coordinate che ci avevano dato.
Prima delle 11 di mattina non è venuto nessuno.
No one came before 11 in the morning. Then they arrived. 2 ships arrived, but since the sea was bad, they stayed far from us. The fireboats arrived around 11 a.m., so about 6 hours, because they came from Brindisi.
Circa 6 ore, perché sono venuti da Brindisi.
La traversata è stata una cosa
The crossing was terrifying, because usually with that kind of sea conditions, you stay safely in port. You find somewhere to hide, anywhere, but we not only sailed, but sailed as fast as we could, and I can't describe what it was like to be aboard. It was incredible.
In the meanwhile, ships were diverted from their courses towards the location of the burning ferry to assist the life rafts. Other tugboats had sailed too, as the ship was closer to Albania than Italy, indeed not far from Albanian waters, although within Italy's area of search and rescue competence, as Rear Admiral Giuffre explains.
Ciascuno Stato ha una sua area di intervento.
Every state has an area of intervention for sea safety that doesn't coincide with territorial waters, and Italy's goes well beyond its territorial waters. And there is a line that separates the areas of intervention with respect to the area of intervention of another state.
Le acque di intervento di uno Stato rispetto a quello di un altro.
Prosecutors in Bari quickly established an investigation, preempting any other jurisdiction, and immediately gave the Baretta Company temporary responsibility for the ship.
Ci fu subito il sequestro ancora in mezzo al mare.
The ship was immediately confiscated on the high seas, and the ship was placed under judicial custody with one of the owners of the tug company. But despite this, there was an attempt, which Vlore prosecutors are investigating, to tow the ship to Vlore by Albanian tugs.
Di rimorchio verso il porto di Valona da parte di rimorchiatori albanesi.
Helicopters began arriving on site too, but the dense smoke impeded access to the bridge.
I had problems because I was cold, so I ran inside. But inside there was a lot of smoke on the bridge, which was the only place we could go. But there, my eyes burned. They were red. They really hurt a lot.
Quando siamo arrivati nelle vicinanze della nave,
when we arrived close to the ship, we could hardly see it because it was covered in smoke, black smoke, and flames that came out of its sides. We came in close and we received the first instructions from the ship's captain and from the first officer. We came in close and began spraying water together with the other tugboat that had arrived earlier that morning.
One of the tugs pushed the ship into the wind so that the smoke was carried towards the stern, leaving the passengers huddled on the top deck and visible to the helicopters. The work of plucking them off the deck was slow, however.
Erano elicotteri piccoli, non so perché.
They were small helicopters that took 2 or 3 per trip. They would take a woman and child 3 times like this, and then left. First they took them to the Greek ship that was close.
However, as dramatic rescues went tediously forward, an unexpected turn of events would end in tragedy. By 11 a.m. on the 28th of December 2014, the tugboats of the Baretta Company had reached the burning Norman Atlantic with its more than 300 passengers on board, desperately awaiting rescue. They were not the only tugboats in the area, however. Whoever saved the vessel would receive a healthy sum from the shipping company.
As we were busy saving the lives of the people on board the ship, there were those who saw this as a purely commercial operation, taking the ship in tow and considering it as a trophy. Obviously, they were not well trained enough. They were improvising, and in this job, you can never improvise.
Non erano sufficientemente esperti, erano un po' improvvisati. Questo è un mestiere dove non si può improvvisare niente.
Quando si fa il traino delle navi,
when you tow ships or any vehicle, if you let the rope sag and then tighten it, suddenly you risk breaking it. The sea was rough, and the 2 units were not in sync, and this is my opinion, the cable tightened and broke like a rubber band. It sliced the leg of one, this is what we were told on board, and cut the neck of the other, and one died instantly, and the other a few minutes later.
The tragic death of the Albanian mariners did not stop the rescue operations. The evacuation continued during the day as the cold winds slowly subsided. The situation on the ship wasn't getting any better, however, after a night in the cold and driving rain.
I got a cooling off when they came to put out the fire. They wet me with seawater. That was bad. It happened in the afternoon, and I had to last till the next day, about 11.
The mariners of the Baretta Company continued to shower the ship with water, under the close direction of the Norman Atlantic's captain, as any misstep could be fatal.
I getti del rimorchiatore sono molto potenti.
The water jets of the tugboat are very powerful, and if we had directed the jets of the water cannon against the people, we would have washed them off the other side, thereby killing them. So we had to aim the water as close as possible to their feet, so under the surface of where they were standing, and not hit the people. All this with the ship moving up and down, and the tugboat even more so.
Some Greek survivors were taken to Corfu, where local authorities had set up first response in a school gymnasium. Other injured passengers were taken to the hospital in Brindisi, where the local population discovered what exactly was going on out on the freezing sea. The civil defense personnel began setting up emergency services. There was no knowing who would need them.
Quando abbiamo appreso della prima vittima,
when we heard of the first victim, we realized that there was a death toll that was destined to rise dramatically. Because although there was a victim, there was no news of any rescues, and the whole operation was moving very slowly due to the high waves, the Force 9 gale, and of course the poor sea conditions as well.
per via del mare grosso, del mare forza 9, delle condizioni meteo marine avverse.
The numbers of people rescued that they communicated to us were sad numbers. After so many hours, with helicopters going back and forth continually, and then you heard still another 270 people, 300 people. How was it possible that these were still the numbers? How can it be? Because unfortunately, people got off in groups of 4 or 5. I don't know, but I don't think the helicopters could take any more.
As the sun set on the freezing Adriatic Sea, the passengers prepared to spend another night in the dark on the burning ship. They were exhausted by now and pitied by the crews of the tugboats who continued to shower the ship with seawater to keep it cool.
La notte è stata più tragica perché
the night was more tragic because it had heightened all the sensations, both the flames and those poor people standing on the top deck, because they were all wearing a life jacket, and they all had a little light. And so what we could see wasn't a starry night, it was people moving around. The lights were higher or lower, and we imagined the children, the people.
Equipaggio, quelli che ho visti.
The crew, those that I saw, worked, called, looked out. During the night, I remember we were up there. I mean, there was a sheet of metal, like this, laid diagonally, where we all took refuge, and I remember that one of them, a crew member I knew who worked in the bar, who came to wake us up. And that reminded me of Titanic, the way they woke them up when they fell asleep.
It was the worst moment of the disaster, as the ship now began listing. At any moment, it could capsize and sink, taking with it its human cargo and the mysterious causes of the fire.
C'è stato un momento più brutto durante la notte che
the worst moment was during the night when the captain said, "Get ready because we are about to jump into the sea," and that was very upsetting because jumping into the sea meant a lot of them dying.
Perché buttarsi in mare significava la morte per moltissimi di loro.
The night passed, and a livid dawn rose again on the second day of the passengers' ordeal. It was the morning of the 29th of December. The numbers reported to the tugboats began to diminish faster at last.
Un momento felice era di notte che girava.
A happy moment happened during the night when I found my friend, Marino Grimfchik. We had met before, but we didn't know we were in the same place. It was a happy moment, at least to have someone you could trust.
Di fiducia.
E lunedì mattina sono venuti quelli di proprio.
On Monday morning, the professionals came from the San Marco, and it all went well. It all went very fast. They are very competent guys, and all I can say is thank you. I left. I wasn't the last, but of the last 40 left on the ship, I was one of those 40.
When they started counting how many of us were left, we calculated that we would be saved in 2 or 3 hours. But when you get onto a helicopter, you always have the doubt that, yes, a doubt. Yes, you can be afraid of a plane or a helicopter, but being pulled up by a winch is something different.
Eventually, everyone who had been waiting on the top deck was rescued by the afternoon of the 29th of December. The ship's captain was the last to leave. The rescue ships began bringing the survivors to Brindisi, where civil defense had prepared emergency services. Now, the Baretta crews had one more vital job to do.
La nave c'era il problema che era.
The problem was that she was drifting, and the only way of getting a cable on her was to go aboard the ship and fasten the tugboat's steel cable. So 5 of us volunteered, myself and 4 others. The first attempt failed due to the excess smoke, and they had to wait one more night before attempting to board the ship again. The first attempt failed because the weather conditions blocked it and it was getting dark, and the Navy people told us we had to get away from the ship because we were civilians. So they took us away from the ship and took us to the Navy ship. At last, on the 30th of December, Francesco Scarafili and his mates was safely delivered onto the deck of the ship.
La prima cosa che abbiamo
The first thing we checked was all the material available, so all the cables available. I checked that they were all good, that they were usable, that they weren't burned. Then we secured our own cables just in case we had to come back aboard from the tugboat.
Di nuovo abbordaggio tramite quei cavi da parte del rimorchiatore.
And once we had lowered the ship's nylon cables, we hung them out so as to be able to get a hold of them. We pulled our own steel cable on board.
Dopo abbiamo aspettato di tirare a bordo il nostro cavo d'acciaio.
The crew members were hoisted up again and delivered safely back to their tugs as the slow journey home began. The high winds continued to dog the convoy, however. In the meantime, the San Giorgio had arrived in Brindisi, and the exhausted passengers disembarked. Marino Grzincic and Zoran Koron had made it through 2 nights on a burning ship.
Quella sera nevicava fortissimo, c'era un vento di maestrale pazzesco e quella sera arrivò.
There was an incredible northwesterly wind, and that night the San Giorgio of the Italian Navy arrived in Brindisi port with 200 survivors aboard, so the largest contingent of the people who had been saved. And we were all slightly shocked that these people, who had spent so many hours on the open sea, so many hours in the freezing cold, were received in a city on the sea, a city of the south, a city with, theoretically, a mild climate, which tended to have mild temperatures. These people were welcomed with the coldest winter. Snow was falling.
Venisse accolta nell'inverno più gelido, cadeva proprio la neve.
So how are you?
Okay, okay.
Bad adventure?
Yes.
What did you go through over the last few days?
Some cold, some smoke, and a lot of waiting.
Did you ever think you wouldn't make it?
Well, that comes to you too, but you just brave it.
And where do you come from?
From Patras.
I mean, where are you from?
Slovenia, Nova Gorizia.
L'ho detto che era abbastanza grave i primi 3 ore.
The first 3 hours were pretty bad. A lot of fire, a lot of smoke. I don't know how to describe it.
Non so come spiego.
I saw that no one jumped into the sea.
Where do you come from?
From Croatia.
It took 5 hours to maneuver the wreck into the port of Brindisi, with an adverse wind, strong currents, and slow decision-making by authorities in the ports of Bari and Brindisi.
It is obvious that a ship with no engines in those conditions goes in the direction it wants, so the entry into port was very, very difficult. We entered very slowly, with the help of 3 tugs, and we even had a 4th tug ready to intervene, if necessary.
The ship was still burning when it was towed into port, so it was moored far from the main harbour. Now, the fire brigade could work on reducing the flames and fumes, so that the investigators could begin assessing what had actually happened to the Norman Atlantic. The heroic crews of the Baretta tugboats spent 3 days on the high seas in gale-force winds, but their mission could not have succeeded without their extraordinary tugs. Luigi Manesi shows off some of the Tenax's features. It is the most powerful of the fleet, equipped with propellers that can turn through 360 degrees.
These are the 2 throttles that control the stern propellers, and they can turn 360 degrees.
Di 360 gradi.
And so when I move them, the stern propellers turn when I turn the throttle.
Come muovo io la manetta.
And pushing forward or backwards, you can move them either 360 degrees or set it into an immediate reverse.
Possono fare anche il reverse immediato.
Rather than speed, these units are used for their power because they reach about 12 knots speed. But this unit in particular can pull 90 tons.
Questo qua, per darle un'idea, c'hanno 90 tonnellate di tiro.
And these are the two joysticks with which we controlled the water cannon, both horizontally and vertically.
On the day, however, the tug's sterns were turned towards the burning ship.
The captain, either myself or my colleague, was here in the command post. The director and I controlled the joystick, one with one joystick and the other with the other joystick, these here. And then I had to put the two mariners outside, and another director was down there to check the water jet, both the men outside and the men down there. They were outside because with the glass we couldn't see as well. So the men who were outside, those poor people, got smoked out just right.
These are the water cannon. Each one can shoot nearly 1.5 million litres of water an hour, with a range of over 80 meters.
These two are controlled with the joysticks that I showed you downstairs. They can turn all around, and the jet can be wider or narrower according to the mission. So if you want to cool down steel sheeting or provide a narrow jet, as we did on that occasion, a narrow and powerful jet.
The tugboat's cables are able to resist forces of 3 times the unit's pulling power, so nearly 300 tons.
This is where the cable is hooked up for towage. And then there's a safety system that unhooks via this cable that can be controlled from the bridge. So if there's an emergency and you have to unhook immediately, there's a lever and it releases the cable housing.
Now the ship was safely moored, investigators gained access and began trying to make sense of the documentation they had been given by the ship owners.
Initially, they found an excess of passengers, and the numbers declared did not correspond to the effective passenger load, such as to lead to the conclusion that there were illegal migrants aboard.
We found out because some survived. They were not all on the list of those aboard, so we can safely say there were illegal migrants. We don't know how many they were. They could be down there still, and if we don't get access to the inside of the whole ship, we will never know.
All'interno della nave per l'intero queste cose non riusciamo a capirle.
An Iraqi and an Afghan were also found to have stowed away and survived. Others were not so lucky. 3 Syrian refugees said that they had seen others on board that they had never seen again. A Turkish doctor called his family, saying he was on a lifeboat. He too was never heard from again, and the lifeboat remains missing. Over the summer, a corpse, still wearing the Norman Atlantic life jacket, washed up on a beach in Puglia. 18 families still have no answers. But Italian authorities have not yet done a complete inspection of the vessel, where many more bodies may still be today. The eerie inside of the Norman Atlantic is a perilous labyrinth of twisted steel, melted plastic, and burned-out vehicles. Several decks burned and then collapsed. The scorched ship may have to be taken apart piece by piece as the search for the dead and missing continues among the debris.
There was an Italian driver of a truck with live fish on board, and we know that he is seen up to a certain point, but never seen again. Indeed, the family of this man, for a long time after the accident, tried to get the authorities to intervene to see if he had ended up on some coastline and lost his memory. But unfortunately, there was nothing to do. The body was never found.
What we were able to do was to monitor the ship with a group of fire officers and, with well-placed sensors, we measured the temperatures aboard, and through those sensors and graphic displays, we were able to determine whether there was a danger that needed to be checked out and intervene where necessary.
Sul ponte di comando esiste.
There is a dedicated space on the bridge called the safety room, where they keep registers concerning the regulations and the applications of safety measures and orders given.
Di salvataggio e comandi. Ora, nell'ambito di
Now, compared to a bridge that may have been messed up but was essentially intact, the safety room has been completely burned.
Invece è completamente bruciata.
Investigators placed the Anek ferry lines and the Wismar shipping company under investigation, but have not yet come to conclusions as to what exactly happened to the Norman Atlantic or who is to blame. For certain, however, international safety regulations were not respected.
If the fire safety system had worked, the fire would not have spread through all the ship, because the fire safety plant not only involves extinguishing the fire, but also isolating it in a specific area. And this did not happen, so clearly it did not work.
If you want safety checks, then you need checks in several different places. If the captain is to have sole responsibility for safety, then events at any moment can become overwhelming. There must be many checks. There must be many that are responsible for the whole security. The shipping company, every single crew member in their area, the flag state that has jurisdiction over the ship, the harbor state that controls the ship where it is actually sailing.
In primo luogo, i nostri assistiti chiedono una cosa, l'accertamento della verità, assolutamente.
First and foremost, our clients want one thing, the truth. To understand what happened, what didn't work, why their lives were put at risk is fundamental. And then those who suffered damage asked to be compensated for what they suffered on the one hand, and for what they risked having to suffer on the other.
Per quello che hanno corso il rischio di subire dall'altra.
All serious accidents at sea, at least those that receive media focus and international focus, we see that creates pressure for improved safety. The problem is that this has to be worked in as part of the daily routine in the maritime organizations. That is part of what we're trying to do in the Skagerrak Safety Foundation, to represent such a consumer power, an alternative voice that can pressure the industry and create change quicker than otherwise. Back in the port of Brindisi, Commander Manesi and his crew have received rightful recognition of their role in saving so many lives.
La nostra opera è stata di tenerli in vita e noi...
Our job was to keep them alive, and thank God we were able to keep them alive while the helicopters took them off. But I think that without our careful, precise work, very few people would have survived. Very few.
When the investigations conclude, and all that went wrong finally comes to light, there will likely be very little for the ferry company, ship owner, captain and crew to be proud of. What the Norman Atlantic disaster does reveal, however, is the pressing need for stricter adherence to international sea safety standards that could prevent the continued tragic and unnecessary loss of life at sea. An unforgiving Atlantic storm in August 2016 caught a lonely tug by surprise as it towed a massive orange oil rig on its last journey before destruction. Lashed by high winds and waves, the Transocean winner broke the tow and crashed into the shoreline of Britain's westernmost island, famed for its spectacular sea views and landscapes. 2 weeks later, it was refloated and towed round the tip of the island. Only 2 months later could it be removed once and for all, in a triumph of technology, as it was lifted out of the sea. For 2 months, the islanders watched anxiously as the head of salvage for the United Kingdom laid the groundwork for a successful salvage. On the morning of August the 8th, 2016, the shocked residents of Dalmore Beach on the island of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides woke up to find an orange steel monster washed up against the rocks of their wild coast. A massive 17,000-ton oil rig had appeared out of nowhere. Photographs of the Transocean winner quickly went round the world, the spectacular, barren beauty of the place contrasting with the environmental hazard the rig represented.
This was a massive steel structure embedded firmly on our shores, and we didn't know what damage that was doing to our shores. We don't know what pollution that might be causing to our environment. So we all struggled for a couple of days wondering what the implications were for us.
I'm sure the costs were substantial, the salvors, the number of vessels that were there, but it would be fair to say that throughout the operation itself that primacy was given to just coming up with the best response and ensuring that the operation was carried out safely without any damage to the environment.
The Transocean winner is a particularly challenging cargo because we don't know exactly what the weight of the rig is. She's damaged. She's been laying around on rocks getting bigger and bigger damages over several weeks before our vessel arrived.
What became evident straight away was that the rig was stuck on the rocks and would not be easy to dislodge. The UK Coast Guard was on the scene already, as they had been warned that the tug towing the rig was in trouble.
I first heard about the incident just after 22:30 on the Sunday night before she grounded, just to let me know that the tug and tow was in difficulty. There was a danger of the line parting. And in early hours the following day, I was advised that the line had parted and the rig actually grounded on the Isle of Lewis just around about 0600 hours.
Britain's Maritime and Coast Guard Authorities headquarters is in Southampton, and this is where the United Kingdom's representative of the Secretary of State for Maritime Salvage operates from, managing maritime emergencies. He flew to the island of Lewis to coordinate the salvage and hear what the owners of the rig had to say. An emergency crew was quickly sent aboard to survey the damage. What they found alarmed the local population. At least 2 of the diesel oil tanks that supplied the 4 engines were ruptured.
Salvage options, Smith Salvage were appointed by Transocean with a view to carry out an assessment and to refloat the rig itself. But obviously in the back of my mind, the other thought I did have was if they didn't manage to successfully refloat her, then we may be looking at a wreck removal operation, which would have been extremely difficult in that exposed part of the coast. It may just have been cutting the whole installation down, starting to remove some of the heavy equipment, but in the exposed area she was, that would not have been a quick option. And we would have probably been looking at well over a year for completion of that operation itself.
The rig's owners, Transocean, contacted the world's foremost salvage company, Smith Salvage, based close to Rotterdam and equipped with its own tugs and equipment, to do the job in a hurry. Smith's long history of successes includes participating in raising the Kursk submarine and, more recently, the 2 car carriers, Tricolour and Baltic Ace. The Dutch company sent a unique salvage master with experience in refloating snagged rigs. Smith's salvage master, Sylvia Tervoort, had experience in recovering another oil rig, this time in Alaska. Shell's Kuluk had similarly broken loose and run aground. The Kuluk was refloated and towed away, a solution Smith and Transocean hoped to apply here too. The Transocean Winner is a 17,000-ton semi-submersible oil rig that for years was used for prospecting the seafloor for reserves of hydrocarbon fuels.
The rig itself, I think she first came into commission in the early 80s. She was on passage from Norway to Malta. She weighed about 17,000 tons itself, and dimension-wise she was approximately 70 metres by 70 metres by about 40 metres depth.
She has 3 cranes, a bridge and a helicopter landing deck, and can accommodate 108 people on board. On the night of the wreck, the rig was unmanned, but it did contain 280 tons of diesel oil for propulsion.
When the salvors managed to get on board the rig itself, they found there was significant damage to the tanks down in the sponsons or the pontoons. The pontoons itself, they included the tanks for the water ballast, and also the fuel was kept down there. And it was fairly quickly ascertained that at least 2 of the 4 fuel oil tanks had been breached, and it was estimated that about 53 cubic metres of diesel had been lost during the impact of the grounding itself.
The Transocean Winner is a semi-submersible rig, which means it floats on the sea with a maximum depth of 450 metres and is held in place by 8 anchors. It is able to drill to a depth of 7,600 metres into the sea floor to explore for hydrocarbons. It is equipped with 2 45-metre long cranes and 1 shorter 20-metre long knuckle crane for movements on board. The rig was already old, and this was to be its final voyage, as overhauling it would not have been cost-effective in the depressed oil industry. Deep water exploration is a speciality of the Transocean Company, whose headquarters are in Switzerland, with offices all over the world. It wasn't Transocean's first brush with disaster. Transocean owned the BP-operated Deepwater Horizon rig that caught fire in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 and causing an oil spill among the worst in American history. Ultimately, BP was held responsible for the incident. On the night of August the 8th, 2016, the Transocean Winner was being towed by this tug, Alp Forward, owned by Dutch company Alp Maritime. It is 65 metres long, 18.5 metres wide, and has a draft of 8.8 metres.
She was on her way from Norway to Malta. The intention was in Malta she would be decommissioned, and then she would be towed the smaller distance then from Malta to Turkey for recycling.
The Alp Forward and Transocean Winner combination set sail on August the 7th from Stavanger in Norway, one of Europe's oil and energy capitals and, like most of the Norwegian coast, a breathtaking place known for its mountains and beautiful fjords. With the Transocean Winner in tow, the tug left Norway heading for Malta via the open Atlantic around the west coast of Scotland. The Transocean Winner was at the end of its career and was due to be dismantled and later scrapped. The rig and tug duo left their location in the North Sea despite a weather warning that a big Atlantic storm was brewing. These storms can be devastating. The ghostly rig was empty as the Alp Forward pushed down the Atlantic. The rocky coastline of northern Scotland is strewn with hidden dangers, with its highly irregular sea floor. And yet, every year, thousands of cargo ships, often laden with dangerous chemicals, sail by close in to shore.
Most of the heavy traffic that passes these islands tends to travel to the west of us. And that includes vessels that will be carrying some really potentially difficult cargo if it were to find itself onto our shores. We have crude oil tankers that pass us by, and they're only passing by in the deep water channel 2 miles off our shores. And we also have chemical vessels with chemicals on board that would be dangerous and hazardous to the environment. They pass by very, very close.
The route shown by the AIS signal sent by the tug suggests that it may have been trying to enter the bay to gain shelter from the storm. But what actually happened will be the subject of an investigation. At 6 a.m. on August the 8th, 2016, the Alp Forward's tow line broke and the crew were unable to control the rig. The local residents were aghast.
The vessel that was towing the oil rig at about 6 p.m. on the evening of the 7th put out a call to the Coast Guard to say that it needed assistance, that it was having difficulty with the tow. A towing vessel based in Orkney was then commissioned to come to its assistance, but it was some 18 hours away. So the towing vessel, as we understand it, for the next several hours between 6 p.m. and 4 in the morning struggled and lost the battle to hold this oil rig on its own.
There was nothing that could be done now. The rig was on its own. The tug made its way to the shelter of the port of Stornoway, where it was kept on hand for the salvage. The Outer Hebrides, the islands of Lewis, Harris, North and South Uist, are the westernmost islands of Scotland. There is nothing between here and Newfoundland. Lewis is exposed to everything the Atlantic can throw at it: wind, storms and dense fog. Lewis is an incredibly isolated place, and getting salvage crews in and out of the island was no small feat. There are flights from the smaller airports of Scotland and twice daily ferries from Ullapool. The rig ran aground near the small community of Carloway on the northwestern shore of the island, famed for its black houses, reminiscent of ancient Viking homes, and the magnificent moors that stretch up to steep cliffs and secluded bays. The rugged, rocky coastline is home to seabirds, and its barren moors are dotted with calm lakes known for their wild trout. Close to Dalmore Beach, where the Transocean winner ran aground, are the Callanish stones, all that is left of the Neolithic culture that once thrived on the island. They still lend an eerie sense of mystery to this farthest west of all the British Isles, where people still speak Gaelic. The local residents are mostly employed in the traditional Scottish Highland activities, such as fishing and sheep farming. The Scottish black-faced sheep are shorn for the wool that is spun and then woven into the world-class woolen cloth known as Harris tweed. Close to the site of the Transocean winner wreck is a family-owned Carloway tweed factory.
Cut off the bit with all the knots in it, and this is what I cut off on Monday morning when it started, still in your room from the previous tweed. About 150 years ago, Lady Dunmore, I think her name was, from Aminsuya Castle, she started taking samples of the local tweed which the crafters were making about 150 years ago onto the mainland to show her friends down in London and Perthshire and all these places. And they liked it so much that they started placing orders for it. And that's where the business started about 150 years ago with Lady Dunmore.
For the locals, the massive beached oil rig was mostly an odd curiosity that brought a few new faces into town. But behind the scenes, many also had serious environmental concerns about the potential impact of an oil spill so close to shore.
The main concern for me was the diesel oil itself. The position where the rig was grounded was less than 4 miles to one of the most environmentally sensitive areas on the island, Loch Rogue. It is designated in 2 areas as a conservation area, and also there were 27 aquaculture sites in the loch itself. So our concern was that any oil, if it was to migrate in that direction, could have potentially caused a lot of damage, to the industry there.
Dalmore Beach is one of the island's best and is world famous for surfing. The white beaches and the Caribbean green waters of Lewis belie the extremely cold temperatures of the sea. The wreck of the Transocean Winner was a blight on the island's broad horizon and threatened this remote and renowned surfer's paradise.
Well, surfing is a hugely important and popular activity here, particularly at Dalmore Beach, where the Transocean Winner oil rig is. It is one of the best surfing beaches anywhere in the United Kingdom. And not only do people come there to enjoy it, people come there to be trained, to be taught how to surf. So very, very important in this area.
On the morning of August the 8th, 2016, the rig was firmly wedged on the rocks of the headland south of the beach. The horizontal crossbar of the rig was stuck fast between the rocks. The westerly winds were still strong, and the local Coast Guard rushed to the scene. These images were filmed by one of the first responders. The first photographs made world news. Salvors managed to climb aboard, but were trapped by bad weather for 2 days. They assessed the damage and activated the generators. They found out that 2 of the oil tanks were breached, but there was no sign of an oil spill in the sea. Diesel fuel evaporates quickly. The oil rig was essentially intact, but the horizontal pontoon containing diesel fuels was stuck on the rocks. There was only one way of getting it off: to refloat it using the highest tide, called a leap tide, which occurs once every month. And the weather had to be good.
We looked at the, obviously the opportunities with the high waters, but it was really down to the Salvage Master and Transocean to decide when they would be ready and when there was the opportunity of the greatest success. What we didn't want to do was try and do the operation prematurely before we were ready, to compromise the rig even further and cause more damage, because with the incoming weather of that, there was a danger if we didn't get her out, when we were ready on our agenda. The longer she sat there, we knew she was likely to sustain more damage.
The tools that Smith needed to carry out the plan were transported to the remote island of Lewis. Smith's own tugs, the Union Bear, Union Princess, and the Olympic Orion, were brought in support. An Augusta Westland 139 helicopter was flown from the Pyrenees with a Catalan crew. Salvage personnel from Transocean joined Smith and Coast Guard crews on board. Despite the cold and bad weather, the salvors were able to get the generator working, and with it the 3 cranes on board, as well as essential lighting, heating and utilities, while the helicopter from the Pyrenees kept them supplied with what they needed. Hugh Shaw coordinated a committee of key players based in the town of Stornoway, the tiny capital of the island.
I established what we call a salvage control unit in Stornoway itself. I was meeting the key parties, the salvors, Transocean, the environmentalists, the Coast Guard on a daily basis to discuss the plans. Smith put forward a plan for refloating the installation itself. But there were a number of things that had to be completed before doing that. Obviously, with the badly damaged tanks, they needed to put compressors on board to build up air pressure, in the tanks to give the required amount of buoyancy for the refloat operation.
The rig is equipped with 4 diesel engines and thrusters. But since these were to be of little use in the refloat, salvors decided to remove all the fuel.
One of the other requirements we had was that we needed to remove, we still had 2 intact oil tanks down in the pontoon, and it was felt that the oil was very vulnerable, that should these tanks be ruptured during the refloat, then we could potentially lose over another 100 tonnes of diesel oil So the decision was made that you know, where it was safe to do so was to pump this oil from the 2 intact tanks, to pump the hydrocarbons up to a higher position, you know, in the rig using the rig's equipment itself. Having done that successfully, we then made a decision that before the refloat itself, we asked for that product to be removed from the rig.
Other vessels were deployed too. Oil spillage was a real threat during all the operations, so 2 crane barges, equipped with floating barriers, were close at hand. They were kept in the Bay of Callaway, where a small jetty allowed crews to land safely. As the days passed, the plan for refloating the rig came together, as local residents and journalists watched with a mix of concern and curiosity. There were 16 fuel tanks that could be emptied and filled with compressed air, and everything would depend on the tide. The tides of the Atlantic Ocean can be very high, and leap tides occur every month with the full moon. The full moon of August rose on the 18th, but the salvors were still not ready. There was a lot to be done yet, priority being given to sealing any fuel leaks. The local Callaway community began to grow anxious. The Coast Guard organised its meeting on the 18th, and this time delivered some answers to the worried Callaway citizens.
We got a huge amount of information on it. It was a very impressive presentation, and we're grateful that they came and did it. It really helped this community.
So it wasn't a matter of waiting for the first opportunity, it was making sure that all the work was completed up until that stage. And it was as we were nearing that that I was approached by the Salvage Master, you know, and Transocean, and they set the date, and I gave my approval that if everything was in place by that time, I gave my consent for the operation to work towards that.
The plan, actually, we started with the assessment. The assessment is always ongoing because you never know if the condition of the rig will change. At the moment we are looking at pressurizing compartments of the rig in order to refloat the rig. In order to do so, we have a lot of equipment coming. There is still a critical part ahead of us, and we need to perform a lot of checks before we can say when we will do the actual refloating, but the method will be based on pressurization of compartments.
With the full moon now starting to wane, the high tides were getting lower and lower. The salvors would have to move fast, but the calculations provided by the marine architects were comforting. The need was to use every possible compartment in the rig to provide buoyancy, which meant not only offloading the diesel oil left on board, but attempting as much as possible to seal the breached tanks. The question would be relatively simple. Would the extra buoyancy be enough to raise the rig those 3 meters to get her unhooked? There were those in Callaway who had their doubts.
I'm not the marine expert on high tides, but I'm a leisure fisherman. There is a high tide this weekend. If they don't grab it, if they're not ready to grab it, then they will have to wait quite some time for another one. And there will not be another one, I don't think, for another month at least.
Well, the plan is we made a decision this morning at the meeting I had with Transocean and Smith Salvage that I've approved the go-ahead for a refloat tomorrow night on the high water. So yesterday they started with the compressors, trying to press up the tanks. That work continues today. So if all goes well, we'll be in a good position to know tonight if all of the 16 tanks that are required by the naval architects are going to hold the pressure we required for the refloat operation itself.
The tide of Monday would be sufficiently above the average sea level, and they needed to raise the horizontal pontoon over the rock. The rest of the rig would have to be able to float away too. Hugh Shaw was overseeing the decisions, and ultimate responsibility lay with him, as the UK government's representative.
We're hopeful that with the buoyancy, it will be sufficient to lift it above any obstructions, and she will float free from where she's sitting at the moment.
The Union Bear was called in to deliver 7 powerful compressors to the rig that would be used to pump air into the fuel tanks. Loading the compressors was a laborious task, given the angle the rig rested at and the positioning of the cranes.
And it was extremely difficult to really seal any of the chambers itself. There were some parts that it wasn't safe to put divers, in the water to go near. So there was some ROV footage, taken to try and give the Salvage Master a better understanding of what damage was there. So there was no real sealing done as such, but there was a number of flanges had to be fabricated on the island, for connection of the air hoses from the compressors, and we used about 7 compressors.
The diesel oil also had to be removed, so the Olympic Princess was called in to take it aboard. The 2 ships could not operate together, so the debunkering could only happen once the compressors had been delivered. In the world of ship salvage, every operation has to happen in a synchronized order. A single mistake in the order of operations can disrupt and delay a salvage for weeks. In the meantime, the helicopter crew took Sylvia on patrols up and down the shoreline to check for oil slicks. Her worst nightmare, given the absolutely pristine nature of the shoreline. The last sufficiently high tide of the month was on the 22nd of August at 9 p.m, just 2 weeks after the Transocean winner ran aground. The day before, however, a dense fog enveloped the rig and the coastline. These extreme maritime conditions occur unexpectedly on the coast of the Outer Hebrides. The fog kept the helicopter grounded. How much would this poor weather delay operations? The island's marine architects, the Coast Guard, Hugh Shaw, and the salver Sylvia Torvet all gathered at the Coast Guard headquarters in Stornoway. Everyone had agreed on a plan. But would it work? The conditions for a safe refloat would be at least 16 airtight tanks would have to be filled with compressed air and sealed, and all heavy equipment taken off the rig. The weather would have to be clear and the sea calm. The rig would have to rise the 3 meters needed to unhook it from the rock, and 2 tugs would have to tow it away. Then the tugs and rig would have to make it all the way round the butt of Lewis, a particularly dangerous stretch of water, round the island. All this would have to happen during the darkness of night. Work carried on intensely on the 21st and well into the afternoon of the 22nd.
Well, I think the risks, obviously, if she is impaled there and if she is holding, but we're not going to compromise what we've done up to this time. So, we are going to see after tomorrow night a slight reduction in the high water heights. We still, Salvage Masters advise me, there still may be 2 opportunities to do it on this current cycle. But if not, we've removed much of the threat from the diesel oil. Yesterday we transferred 200 tonnes from the installation onto one of the supply vessels. So the risk itself environmentally over the last 24 hours has reduced considerably. There are only small quantities left on board now.
The 2 tugboats owned by Smit Boskalis were the Union Bear, 73.5 metres long, 16.5 metres wide, with a draft of 6.9 metres and a pulling power of 187 tons, and the slightly smaller Union Princess. The Union Bear is seen here on the day before the refloat in the port of Stornoway.
The two vessels that were engaged in the refloat was the Union Princess and the Union Bear, and they both made the connections during that day in the lead up to the refloat itself, and they were the two vessels that towed the rig round to Broad Bay itself.
In these images, shot during the night, the lights of the tugs and of the Transocean Winner show the movements. The sea was calm. The spectators on shore were given hospitality and refreshments, as the work on board continued frantically.
There was a lot of uncertainties. You know, there were parts of the rig, certainly below the waterline, that had been difficult to survey. So although the salvors had a fair understanding of what damage there was and what buoyancy they would require, there was always the danger that perhaps you know, part of the pontoon might be impaled by one of the rocky outcrops. And although they may have had to the buoyancy, there was no guarantee that the rig would float off itself. So having stood for several hours on the beach with a large number of salvors and other staff and members of the public, there was delight to see the rig, you know, starting to move itself into deeper water, you know, as the tug started to pull her, you know, off the beach.
The tide began rising, and the salvors watched impatiently. A small sea swell would also help raise the rig.
I think there was the concern that the you know, she may just simply swivel if she was stuck on the rocks itself, you know, on that side. So again, we probably passed the high water time, and it was actually after that when we started to see the movement, and probably, you know, again minutes after that when, you know, we realised that she was finally clear of the rocky outcrop itself.
Copy that. The bracing has cleared the rock. Union Princess, Union Bear. Yeah, we can reduce the tension on the wire. Reduce some tension on the wire.
Great delight, and what we did hear in the background was a round of applause from many of there were hundreds of onlookers there, many members of the public, which I think was quite special moment in particular for the Salvage Master and her team, who'd done such a fantastic job in managing to get her out from there.
The plan had worked, and now the Transocean Winner was afloat in deeper water.
We got the rig into deeper water. There was a period where the Salvage Master simply held the rig in that position. There was a need for the people on board. We had salvors on board, plus we had representatives from Transocean on board, and I think their role was to go around to check the spaces, to make sure she wasn't taking water in any other areas that we weren't anticipating, and again just trying to ensure that she was as stable as she could be before that tow commenced up and around the Butt of Lewis itself.
Now that the rig was off the rocks, getting it around the island before the weather turned was the salvors' main priority. The Transocean Winner was off the rocks, but the 9 p.m. high tide had meant that the transfer around the Butt of Lewis had to be carried out at night. This was a particularly dangerous moment for the whole operation.
You know, there was still some concern that, okay, having successfully refloated the rig, we still had a tow which was going to be 53 miles. We'd estimated that tow may take about 18 hours to get the rig from the west of the island down to Broad Bay on the east side, and actually that took nearly 40 hours at the end of the day. So we knew that was still going to be a precarious part of the operation. That would be the first time that the naval architect and the salvors would be able to perhaps better understand what damage was, and knowing that the rig was simply going to be getting kept afloat by the compressors.
Once the rig was in the bay off Stornoway, it could be repaired and a plan for removing it could be made. The decision was reached to hire an amazing vessel to take the rig away. The OHT Hawk is a semi-submersible ship. It can be sunk and then refloated with cargo aboard. When the ship recovers buoyancy, it takes the load into the deck and can sail away.
To submerge the vessel, what we do first is to start filling up the tanks until the main deck is almost underwater. And this is a very critical stage, because if you have free water running around in the tanks when you submerge, the vessel loses its stability, and that's very critical.
The Hawk is owned by the Norwegian company OHT that is specialized in hiring out ships for specific tasks.
The Hawk was originally built as an oil tanker, and in 2008-2009 we took her into a shipyard in China and converted her into the vessel that we see today. We removed a 60-meter section of the midship, and we took down the depth of the vessel from 26 meters down to the 13 meters that the vessel has today. She has a weight of 25,600 tons, but when she's sailing, she has 85,000 tons. And if she's submerging, the weight of the vessel is actually 130,000 tons.
But how does a semi-submersible ship actually work?
We have specially designed the ballast system to make sure that we can fill the tank up to only a very few centimeters of air pockets in the tanks. And only when all this is under control, the crew on board will fill the rest of the tanks so that the deck submerges underwater. And in this phase, we can go down in only a few hours, 2-3 hours, from deck just above water until the loading draft, when we can take the rig over the deck.
What are the special complications in loading it?
There are many things to take good care of when you want to submerge the vessel. One thing is free surfaces, as we call it, water being able to flow from one side to the other inside the tanks. The vessel has 78 ballast tanks, and there can be a lot of water flowing around. And that's very important for the crew to manage and to make sure that the tank is either completely full or completely empty. And we have designed the systems to make that job easy.
It arrived on the 21st of September 2016, 6 weeks after the rig was rammed ashore. The weather was changing fast, with autumn turning towards the dark northern winter. The oil rig's high profile made it unstable once the anchors had been released.
The waves are also important. We have a very, very low wave limit for these loading operations, because you have two floating objects. One is the ship that floats and heaves up and down with a certain frequency, and then you have the cargo with another frequency floating up and down. And when these come close to each other, they can hit each other, and you can have big damage both to the cargo and to the ship.
It would take another 2 weeks before a window of fine weather allowed the tugs to tow the rig over the sunken deck of the Hawk.
When we load a cargo like the Transocean Winner, she's brought across to the submerged vessel by tugs. So the rig has one tug connected in each corner, comes near the vessel, and then we use our workboat to run lines across to the rig. From there, we start pulling in, and the tugs give slack. And when we have full control of the cargo, when she's over our deck, then we start pulling her up against two 9-meter tall guide posts.
Once the massive and severely damaged orange rig was precisely positioned over the deck of the Hawk, the reballasting could begin.
We have planned carefully in advance where these guideposts are going to hit the cargo, and we do that very, very, very slowly, so there's very little force going into them. It's a very controlled operation. So we pull the cargo onto the guideposts and see that the lines align with the center of the guidepost, and then we give the order to the chief officer to start deballasting the vessel. And we deballast until we have full contact with the vessel and see that everything is in order.
The Maritime Coast Guard Agency and Hugh Shaw could breathe a sigh of relief. The role of the UK's Coast Guard in this incident was exemplary.
I think the MCA, Maritime Coast Guard Agency, has got an extensive role right through the incident. For myself, they provided the facility, you know, and the infrastructure to support the salvage control unit that I chair with the other key stakeholders. They provide the communications through the Coast Guard side of the business, you know, out to all the vessels involved in the operation. They were responsible, the counter pollution and salvage, branch within the business. They were responsible for approving the oil spill contingency plans, that should we be unlucky enough to have a spill, then they could ensure that the plan was appropriate and the right equipment was there to deal with it. They were bringing in the aerial surveillance aircraft.
Finally, on the 12th of October 2016, the Hawk lifted the Transocean Winner out of the sea. The rig began its final voyage to Malta for demolition, one last adventure in its long life drilling for black gold. The island of Lewis could return to its tranquil, wild state. But questions remain about government cuts that removed the Coast Guard tugboat from Stornoway, leaving the island without an emergency response capacity.
But I think it'd be fair to say that once the towing line had disconnected, it would have been extremely difficult. Obviously, the Alp Forward itself, the towing vessel, had tried to establish a reconnection. With the rig being unmanned itself, it would have been extremely difficult for any vessel or any number of vessels, had they been there, to effect another connection. So I don't think the fact that there was no tug there had any impact on this incident itself.
The Transocean Winner incident is an example of the kind of accident that could happen in the wild North Atlantic as cargo ships sail by these beautiful islands whose residents live peacefully off the land and the sea, unaware of the potential threat that plows the waves just a few miles westwards. However, the swift removal of the Transocean Winner from the rocks of Dalmore Beach is also the result of efficient salvage operations, closely monitored by Britain's authorities on one of its most remote shores.